Hello and welcome to the Hustle and Bustle podcast. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is being recorded, the Yugambeh people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name's Nicole Bennett and I'm an urban and regional planner, and I'm the host of this podcast. Each episode I bring you conversations with city shapers and urban thinkers, leaders in the field of urban planning and city building. I'm located here on the beautiful Gold Coast in Australia. We're one of the host cities for the Brisbane 2032 Olympics and Paralympics. The next 10 years is being described as the golden decade for our city and our region. The conversations on this podcast help us understand the opportunities and challenges ahead. So let's take a minute from our busy hustle and bustle day and let's have a great conversation. And welcome to episode 19 of 2022. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Stefan from the CSIRO. He is a principal scientist in foresight and strategy, working in the field of strategic foresight in Australia's National Science Agency. This is the second time he's joined me on the podcast, and he's devoted his career to helping governments, companies and communities comprehend patterns of change so they can make wiser choices and secure better futures. He has academic qualifications from the University of Queensland and University of New England in the fields of geography, economics and decision theory. Stefan has published widely in the international scientific literature. His work involves a combination of original research and the provision of consulting and advisory services. One of my favourite publications from Steph is Global Megatrends, which details a set of significant trends which are affecting our people, places and planet into the future. And I recently saw CSIRO publish a new megatrends document, and that's the reason why I wanted to have Stefan on the podcast today. He's a lead co-author of this new document, and I think I'll just throw to you now and say, how are you today?
I'm really well, thanks, Nick, and thanks for having me on the show again. I love Hustle and Bustle. It's a great show, so it's an honour to be on it with you.
Awesome. And I'm a sucker for your publications. As soon as I see something that comes out, especially around megatrends, as a planner that loves looking to the future, I need to know all about it. So I'm so thrilled that you were able to join me and accepted the invitation again to be on the show. Can you tell me a bit about the report that you released last week on the 7 megatrends that will shape the next 20 years?
Certainly, Nick. So we started this work actually back in 2009 was when I first seriously got engaged in doing it in CSIRO. So we've been doing it for quite a while. And I was initially asked to look at the future for CSIRO as we plan our own science and research agenda out into the future. Our basic challenge is how do we ensure we're investing in the science and technology solutions that matter the most for future Australians. And I was tasked with trying to flesh out what the environment might look like 10 years out into the future. And we reviewed a lot of different methodologies. We looked at Shell's scenario planning, but we landed on this concept of megatrends by US academic John Naisbitt. These trajectories of change occurring at economic, social, environmental, legal, technological trends, which are smaller and come to give it this bigger megatrend. And we opened up a website for all our staff. We got 4,500 scientists across all different fields of science technology, including the social sciences and business analytics and strategy type people. And they were able to put trends onto the website and edit each other's trends and build a knowledge base about trends. And we've effectively, in various ways, been building that trends database ever since. Now, we released our first version of the report in 2012. Became the most downloaded thing on the CSIRO website ever, actually, in history. And we've just released the 2022 report, which the communications team has now reached 14 million pairs of eyes. So it's gone wide around the world, pardon me, with a lot of views. And it really is a narrative of the future based on evidence about how things are changing.
Yeah, amazing. So how are the megatrends identified? You've kind of gone through that the scientists all come together. Yeah. And so was this sort of a different process, given that this is kind of a 10-year review of that first report? Was there sort of something you did differently with identifying these trends?
Yeah, look, it's maturing, certainly. And I think, I like to use the analogy of a megatrend to an ocean current. Being a Gold Coast resident, you'll know about rips on the beach, and rips are deadly. They are the biggest killer on our beaches by far. But at the same time, surfers love them. They get you out through the white water to the break. So they're these powerful currents. And it's actually, if you stand on a beach and look at a beach, it's pretty hard to work out what is and what is not a rip. And I think it's a good analogy to the concept of a megatrend. There are powerful forces that are happening around your career, around your company, your organization, your family, that are going to impact you into the future. And your ability to comprehend what they are allows you to manage the upside like a surfer does, the rip, but it also lets you mitigate the risk. And our analysis is all about helping you when you look at the beach to be able to determine, what's going on and where, so that you can have a good day at the beach, basically. So that's the nature of the analysis we do. Now, in the early work, where it's matured is that since we did that first report, we've done about 30 or 40 studies on sport, tourism, the future of work, the future of transportation. We've looked at a lot of different areas. And every time we do a study like that, we generate trend information, but we feed it back into our databases and our knowledge. And as we got into the pandemic and post-pandemic world, we thought it was time to have another look at it and put out a refreshed version of that report, because we've certainly seen the trajectory of change alter from what it was previously. And I'd say in some ways it's been a bit of a more somber affair putting this report together. Things that we were talking about that were possible in climate change or plausible have now become lived realities for a lot of Australians through the bushfires and the floods, which have had such profound impact. But we are seeing things also like the pandemic too is not something we're speaking about as a risk of infectious diseases. It's now a lived experience for a lot of Australians. So as we look into the future, there certainly are challenges, but still there's a lot of reasons for optimism around our advanced scientific and technological capabilities that we've developed.
Yeah, okay. Let's get into the mega trends. So there's 7 of them.
That's right.
Let me just rattle them off, and then I'd love to sort of get the little sales pitch or the pitch on each of them. It's probably not a sales pitch when they're a bit negative, some of them. But adapting to climate change is number 1, as it should be. Number 2 is leaner, cleaner, and greener, which I love. Right. Number 3 is the escalating health imperative. Number 4 is geopolitical shifts. Yes. Number 5 is diving into digital, which is an interesting way of saying digital, I think. Yes. Number 6 is increasingly autonomous, I should say. Correct. And then number 7 is unlocking the human dimension, which is cool. All right. So can we start at any one of those? I guess climate change is the number 1, but
and it did find its way to the top of the tree because it's one of the most significant changes in our narrative and one of the biggest challenges as we look going forward. And it is about adaptation at the beginning, because even though mitigation is really important and is dealt with in that second megatrend, leaner, cleaner, greener, the adaptation imperative is there in that one of the data sets I look at on climate change is parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at Cape Grim in Tasmania. It's on the western coast of Tasmania. It's a meteorologically significant measurement station that CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology maintain. And it gives us a pretty accurate reading of how well we're doing in terms of greenhouse gas mitigation. And if you look at this graph, it's online, you can Google it and you can see it. You can see this graph is not going anywhere but up pretty steeply since 1980. And despite all of what we're hearing, all of the talk on reducing emissions and all of the important activity on reducing emissions, the reality is the concentration of carbon dioxide, the fundamental problem here is continuing to rise. So even if we do brilliantly on climate change now, in terms of emissions reductions, we are in for a lot of more frequent and severe extreme weather. And this is a reality that we need to speed up the adaptation to. We don't have oodles of time to now get ready for floods, for fires, for extreme heat. It's coming. And if, as I've talked to scientists on this, the two that really stand out, it all matters, but the two standout ones are extreme heat, which is associated with the highest level of mortality already. Heat, if you take all forms of natural disaster and combine them, the number of people that are killed by natural disasters, all of them put together is still less than extreme heat on its own. Yeah. Heat waves and extreme heat, and there's a immediate component to extreme heat stroke, which I suffered. Obviously didn't die from it, but I got pretty unwell. I did a paving job in 40 degrees Celsius and became really quite intensely, I should have known better, but I became intensely
living
unwell.
The research.
That's right. It was a self-inflicted experiment, but don't do it. And it didn't matter how much water I must have drunk about 10 litres of water. It wasn't helping. My organs were starting to cook, actually, and I felt unwell.
Wow.
It took about a week to recover from that. But so it can kill you as well. So that's
And you
one
see
aspect to it.
It's playing out in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment.
Absolutely.
There's, extreme heat and heat waves. Now there's a natural, like we name cyclones, they're naming the sort of heat wave that's going through some of these
that's right.
cities and countries. It's terrible.
It is. It's terrible. There's the immediate impact, and then there's chronic illness as well. Long exposure to elevated temperatures has been linked to problems with kidneys and other issues about your well-being, mental health as well. So there is a huge adaptation imperative, and town planners are really important here in that we've got to, greenery is a big part of the solution. One of the most cost-effective interventions we can make with all the concrete that is getting put everywhere is to put trees out there and, wrap skyscrapers in vines, start creating urban greenery is a really good way of significantly dropping temperatures. There's a lot of science that is showing us how effective that is. That's one of them. But we need other interventions. Outdoor misting systems are becoming more commonplace, and they'll be part of it. Cool roofs that bounce a lot of the heat off, building designs that mitigate heat. I think there is scope to do a lot more with electric fans as a really energy effective way of reducing temperatures. There's been some really good research on that. Air conditioning is important. I tend to see air conditioning as a last resort. If you're needing to turn the aircon on, it's a pity because there's a lot we can do to reduce the need for that sort of expense. So that's one thing that I think we're pointing towards in the report that requires the planning community, urban designers and engineers is to think about building cities for extreme heat. The impacts, like Phoenix, Arizona, when the temperatures got really high, the airport had to be closed because when the air gets hotter, it gets thinner, and the planes need a longer runway to take off. And it got to the point where they couldn't safely take off anymore. So that's the nature of the impact that we see on infrastructure and critical systems.
Yeah. Yeah, and does that go to the second point around leaner, cleaner, greener, or what's this sort of trend focusing on?
So that's about all the amazing innovation we're seeing that reduces emissions, but allows us to find a way through this with food, water, mineral, and energy resources becoming scarce relative to demand. As the population increases, we see the demand rising. The demand for electricity is spiraling. It's growing at about twice the rate of energy demand. When BHP did their megatrends report a bit before us, they talked about the electrification megatrend. Cars, everything pretty much is just fueling the demand for electricity. But the good news is that the technology, especially wind and solar, keeps getting better and better. The CSIRO Gen Cost report looks into the generation cost of different types of electricity, and wind and solar outperform everything now, and coal and definitely nuclear and all forms of energy. So it's because battery technology's got so good, the costs are dropping, and it is becoming economic for grid deployment of battery systems. So there's a lot of scope to increase generation through solar and wind.
And does hydrogen fit in there?
Absolutely. And now hydrogen's really important as a transportation fuel, I think. So for aviation, for shipping, it's a clean fuel, and you can make hydrogen via renewable energy. You can use the electricity to split the water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen can be released without any harm into the atmosphere, and then the hydrogen is a really powerful fuel source, and it has higher energy density than lithium-ion batteries. So we can use it in planes and cars, but even the improvements in battery technology may see, not too far out into the future, you and I might see small regional commercial flights powered by electricity, which would be, not jet fuel.
Wow.
So there's different ways we can power stuff, and I think it's happening. Probably needs to happen a bit faster, but there is a lot of innovation going on that allows us to find a way through.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And the next one's the escalating health imperative. So obviously this is, in relation to the post-pandemic world and these health challenges that we're facing in terms of aging population and chronic disease. What can you tell us about this that's different, in this report?
Well, there is some things that are the same, and that's the aging population is continuing. Some of the
Yeah.
rates of chronic illness, such as obesity, for example, has started to level off a little bit, but still
Yeah,
is hugely
interesting.
challenging. But there still is this enormous health burden that we carry in Australia due to chronic illness, related to poor diet, lack of exercise, and I think increasingly lack of sleep and poor sleep patterns. This is something that we're getting more data on, but I think it is connected to some of the mental health issues. During one of the changes that has happened during COVID, tragically, is an increase in mental health issues.
Mm,
Big in the cities with really harsh lockdowns had this,
mm,
where in Sydney, I understand over half of the presentations at GPs at the height of the lockdowns were for depression or anxiety. So it was really high, and I think that the aftermath of that will be with us for some time to come. But there is a really significant requirement to turn our attention to mental health. And again, the diet, exercise, and sleep play a really important role in fixing that, as well as some of the chronic illnesses. So as people building our built environment and urban planners, put those things into it, of especially active transportation and designs that encourage people to get out and get physical. This is something that we know with bikeways. I've read the literature on bikeways. We know it works. Build them and they
mm,
do come.
mm.
And better, higher quality ones mean we get more people using them. But there is one of the good things that happened in COVID is there was a big uptick of people doing hiking, mountain biking, bushwalking. There was a decrease in certain types of organised sports because you couldn't play them because of the
Yeah.
restrictions,
Yeah.
but we saw physical activity actually increase for a lot of the population, and I think that was a really positive sign that we should look at continuing too. But then the health megatrend too does unfortunately have the data on infectious disease risk, and by and large the answer is it's getting a higher risk, not a lesser risk, for pandemics
Mm,
in the future.
yeah.
The last 20 years have seen H1N1, H1N5, SARS, MERS, Ebola, recently Japanese encephalitis, a really bad flu season, in addition to, of course, COVID. So that's way more than the previous 20 years. And the reasons, the underlying drivers are um, population growth, urban population concentration, mass urbanization across Asia, increased livestock production and interaction with livestock and wild animals as well by people, because that's most of these diseases are zoonotic. They transfer, a pathogen transfers from an animal into a human,
Mm,
and that risk is elevating. So all of the jet travel is the other one that is resuming and likely to continue at very high rates. That just spreads the illness really quickly around the globe. So all of the drivers are there, and I think the critical thing is that as we look at the pandemic, we should be looking at building resiliency for future ones. And
yeah.
then, just to make you even more cheerful, we've put in there the story of antimicrobial drug resistance, and this is bacteria becoming resistant to the antibiotics we use to kill them. And increasingly, people will know of a relative or a friend who is subject to this. It happened to my mother-in-law not so long ago. She had an infection that the antibiotics didn't work on, and they had to try lots of different ones in different combinations. But she was in hospital a lot longer, and it was a lot more painful because of that problem. And that is
Mm,
also a looming challenge. This notion of a post-antibiotic world that is far from solved, and is going to require. But so all of this calls on science, technology, innovation, doing stuff smarter. But we should remember that even though some of this stuff is a bit bleak and scary, the ability of humanity to produce those vaccines really quickly, and Australian science played a big role in doing that. We were active in almost all the vaccine production aspects. We did it a hell of a lot faster than anyone could ever have expected. If you remember
mm,
the early dates, like March in the pandemic in 2020, we didn't
yep.
know if there would be a vaccine. Most people
No.
were probably, most scientific opinion, I think, was no, it's not going to be possible. We're just going to have to ride it out.
Well, not
But
something that's highly effective. I think some of the things I was
yeah,
listening to were saying, oh, we might be able to do something that does 60% or,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, they
exactly.
did amazing to do what they did in the time frame, really.
That's right. And we've just gotten so much better at doing it.
Yeah.
All sorts of technologies, including artificial intelligence, is letting us do this faster and better. So, I think this whole story of the future we're putting forward is one where, there is a way through this rip to somewhere better via science, technology, innovation, but also action, taking some action now on all
Yeah.
sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. That's a big trend, and that's one that sort of we probably wouldn't have discussed at that length, 10 years ago when
Well,
the original report came out.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I presented that material right across Australia, and one thing that always happened is infectious diseases were always put to the. That's kind of nice, Stefan, but it's not really that relevant to our company, or it's not
Yeah,
really that relevant to what we're doing. And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, it can
You
be.
wait. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I
Wow.
think that's the nature of some of these disruptors is they're not clearly relevant to you yet,
Yeah,
but this is the nature of the future. They can come to the fore really quickly, and
absolutely.
have and these global trends transmit to local implications very quickly, as well.
Well, let's look at geopolitical shifts because I mean we're
Yeah,
seeing a bit of
yeah,
this happening currently, and it's a bit
yeah.
unnerving to be completely honest. So, what are we seeing here? I mean, I know this was in the 10 years ago we were chatting about it as well, but what's sort of how would you sum this one up now?
Yeah, I mean, I have worked with defence a little bit on scenario planning work, and this is increasingly understood the risk here around the changing power structures in the world of going from one really dominant power structure, military power, to multiple ones. And it's an uneasy pathway to the future through this transition. The Australian Defence Department say the Asia Pacific regions is amidst the most significant strategic realignment since World War II. And I think that's not a bad way of thinking about what's happening. It is a realignment that can go well, but there are certainly some big issues in how it plays out. What we
Mm,
can see is defence expenditure rising more rapidly than ever before in most countries across the globe, including in Australia. We're going to be continuing to increase, and our data shows strong increases in defence spending. We're seeing a desire to bring forward capabilities that might have been planned for 2035 to 2025, because we kind of need it sooner. So a bit like the
mm,
climate change dilemma, we can't sit on our hands and watch this. We need to upgrade capability in all sorts of areas, and a lot of countries are having that same imperative. Technologies are changing some of the risk profile as well. So hypersonic weaponry and high speed variable trajectory missiles, that we don't know where they're going to hit, what the target is, until seconds or minutes before it impacts, because it follows a variable trajectory. It's also incredibly difficult to knock them out of the sky before they hit. So
yes.
this is a direction this is a reality of the sort of military capability that we've got to be able to handle, and it changes the strategic play on the like what types of defense technology will be effective against these is sort of a challenging question. Then autonomous systems and artificial intelligence are playing an increasingly important role in defense as well. I think there's reasons to be optimistic there as well, in that autonomous systems might do a lot less damage to civilian populations than conventional armies, because they don't make the same sort of mistakes that humans do. So, it's a reality of a technological shift. And then the last one is cyber warfare and information warfare is on the rise.
Mm,
The cyber attacks on water infrastructure, on energy infrastructure,
yeah.
but also the attempts to manipulate us from really advanced and well-resourced players are going up a lot. COVID saw a massive uptick in cybercrime, but I think we've also seen increased attempts to use digital technologies to impact pretty critical infrastructure, elections, and it's a reality for the future that we're moving towards as well. So there's certainly challenge in this space. The report does also note how much cooperation has increased between democratic countries,
Yeah.
OECD countries. That's not to be underplayed, and how clear and quick they have been to join together and reach agreements and share resources and capability. So that is also something that we can see happening too. And I think there is a pathway through this, but it is also another reality that Australia has to come to terms with, is that the sort of stability that we always were used to
Mm.
isn't to be taken for granted, and needs a there isn't an imperative around defence capability upgrading.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think you've covered some. I mean, I'm hanging on every word because these are, it's almost like you just don't know where the opportunities and risks will come from because
Well,
there's a number of these that are out there that could play in either way. Um, Next one is diving into digital. I think we've spoken a little bit about this, and I know this is a real passion of yours. And our
yep.
last podcast went into the potential of digital and how we really need to start harnessing it. So I'd love to hear what you've sort of found in terms of are we making strides towards becoming more digital? I mean, I know COVID has seen everyone, with teleworking becoming much more prominent, but there's so much that more can be done.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I think it's something like only 16% of retail sales today were online in Australia, but it is growing at 50% per annum. It's way faster than traditional retail. So the retail sector of the future looks quite a lot different. The 2030 retail sector on the Gold Coast looks quite a lot different to what it is today, for example. But we could look at a lot of digitization trends, and you're exactly right. COVID has fueled it. What has allowed a lot of people to maintain their income and jobs during COVID is their ability to take their job from the physical world and immerse it into digital. The sort of video conference that we're on now has been critical to our productivity, and I think we're still fleshing out how significant that's been, but I think it is a really significant aspect that actually changes the way regional economies work. Like if we look at the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, there's huge populations, workforces of teleworkers. They're exporting goods and services from Australia to other countries over internet connections, which we don't measure yet, but we should measure. They're also really significant sources of economic growth and job creation, and they may have changing impacts in terms of how a city operates. Right? They may cause different transportation patterns to start to emerge, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is an opportunity as well to start to rethink, how cities are designed and, where the city centre is. It may not be movement in and out of a city centre. It might be a lot of different types of movement to a lot of city centres, for example. But I think that we haven't really thought enough about how digital technology changes the spatial configuration of land use across a city. It's also a really significant employer. The Tech Council of Australia estimates we're somewhere around that 800, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but around 850,000 tech workers today, grows by about 400,000 to 2030. So I think check their website to see the exact numbers, but I understand they're pretty significant in terms of growth, and it's a lot of good jobs for people with good salaries, it's like a big capability upgrade that I think is happening across young and old as well in the space of digital.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a really interesting one because it goes to some of those other ones that you were just discussing. I mean, digital could be weaponized through the geopolitical shifts. Then you think about kind of how do we as planners deal with the health imperative, in terms of connecting people, wanting that physical connection when we've got kind of issues around social distancing and, and making sure those mental health issues are being resolved, and then then you've got the kind of cleaner, greener, leaner one, which, I think some of that technology advancement can really help some of that, new fuels and thinking about that kind of net zero transition. So it links to all of them, doesn't it?
It does. And I mean, inside all of these megatrends are these challenges. Inside defence are these, opportunities. Inside defence is this opportunity. A lot of Australians are going to get really good jobs building our defence capabilities into the future, and they're going to range from physical infrastructure through to digital work, and similar, our energy transition, it also represents a lot of really good new jobs in clean tech, energy tech that people would like to have. So these problems are opportunities when viewed in a different way. And then I think digital will play this critical role in resiliency. If we take the Gold Coast and we shock it with a pandemic, we shock it with floods and other extreme events, the ability for people to transfer their livelihoods into a digital medium is going to be one of the things that helps the city withstand those sorts of shocks.
Become more resilient.
More resilient, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's part of why it is important. We haven't done enough work yet to understand the productivity benefits of digital. The fact that a lot of people are now not making that long commute to work every day. part of that time probably gets put into work time, increasing
Absolutely.
productivity, and that's
Or
something.
health,
But
maybe
or
they're now
health,
going for
yeah.
a walk or something else,
Well,
and that only increases productivity as well.
that's it. I mean, my understanding is what happened in COVID is that, like, the local cafe near where I live, we're sort of 6K out from the city centre in Brisbane, but those ones, the ones in the suburbs, did really well because all of the teleworkers like me
Yep.
didn't use their inner city cafe. We started using that one instead,
Yeah.
and we started walking to it. And we started walking in Mount Cootha a lot now. Mount Cootha's just been brilliant during the pandemic for us because
Yeah.
it's our escape place and it's beautiful. But I think those patterns of behaviour are staying, and it might be that we still want that human contact. We still want to work with people, but we might build different sorts of social networks for our work. So we don't
more
come
local.
in and work more local. And they might not be people that work in the same, not only company, but even industry. They might be from quite different walks of life. But how interesting if the sort of co-working centre in a regional part of the Gold Coast, for example, was filled up with architects, engineers, historians, all sorts of different skill sets. Wouldn't it be interesting? And I wonder what that would really unlock. It could be quite cool.
Yeah. Let's get these last two done because
Yep.
we could talk about this, I think, for hours, Steph.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. I'm far too into it, I must admit.
Yeah.
Second last one is increasingly autonomous. So this is around artificial intelligence and how that could transform industry sectors.
That's correct. So we're doing another project on the use of artificial intelligence for science. And if you look at science and technology itself as a sector, the big thing that's going to change is AI and machine learning, the ability of the machine to recognize patterns, learn and problem solve with much reduced guidelines from the human user. That is the thing that's got us really out of bed on artificial intelligence. Now, it's had some really significant breakthroughs in recent times. AlphaFold, two were developed by DeepMind, the Google offshoot, and AlphaFold was one of those, and it is able to use the DNA information to predict the structure of a protein. Now, that's really important for vaccine production, and it does, what scientific teams were doing in 10, 20 or 30 years worth of effort that was tedious and hard and often didn't work, it's doing within hours or minutes. It's doing very quickly. And
Isn't that scary? Like, I know it's an opportunity, but doesn't that freak you out just a little bit?
It does a little bit, but I think here's the thing on AI, all that stuff of Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Terminator staring at all those sorts of images, it's not how a lot of it really looks. A lot of it is way more boring than that, but still very impactful. A lot of AI will be behind the sort of medical treatments you get in the future. A lot of it, all these challenges we're pointing towards, it's part of where the human scientist has hit a wall in problem solving. They're turning to this thing called AI, which is able to find an optimal solution where we couldn't find one before. I mean, another one was nuclear fusion research, which is like free energy. That just reinvents the world as you know it pretty much overnight if we get to it. And there's some pretty serious investment in startups in making this happen now. But in January this year, that's when a machine learning approach was used to control the superheated plasma inside a device called a tokamak via an electromagnetic field. The plasma is too hot to touch anything, so you've got to hold it in an electromagnetic field, and then you've got to use the electromagnetic field to give that plasma the right shape to house the nuclear reaction, and that shape is pretty important. The machine learning was able to do it better than people, and that took us to a sustained reaction that could generate electricity better than we've ever seen, and is a significant step forward in the field. So we've looked across all fields of science, and we find this. We've looked at the share of all scientific publishing in peer-reviewed journals. We see this really steep uptick in the last few years about the use of science in all fields of science and the arts and humanities. It's really accelerating, and this to me is one of the really exciting things about the future we're moving towards, is the big boost that science is getting from AI and digital to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, fascinating. Last one, unlocking the human dimension. So this to me seems almost in contrast to the AI, because this is all about what humans can do and how we can kind of consider trust, transparency, fairness. inequity, governance, all of these kind of important, public trust aspects. What can you tell us here?
Well, look, a lot is happening since the last report. Gender issues have been brought to the fore. Race equality issues have been brought to the fore.
Yeah.
These things increasingly matter and are increasingly in the spotlight. So I think those sorts of considerations are of much greater importance, especially as we develop AI. Ethics is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and it should be. It's really important. Yeah. My team did actually write the ethics framework for artificial intelligence in Australia, a set of principles to guide the ethical development and application of AI. And I think we're at the early stages of that, but it's happening. But also, and that is trust. And I think what is an interesting question is how you get trusted information. How do you decide what information to listen to online? Right now, there's people listening to this podcast, but what interests me is how they choose this podcast and how they choose whether or not this is trusted material versus all the other ones. And we do know too that some people get caught up in social media echo cycles where they connect to an information source and then the algorithms feed them more and they self-select more until pretty soon they're caught up into a quite crazy world sometimes where they think something like COVID is caused by Wi-Fi or something like that, and they're not getting any sort of correction. There's no challenge to that information because they've closed off accurate information sources. And I think this is one of the challenges we face in communication is how to share accurate and trusted and reliable information.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one.
Yeah.
I've got some personal experience with people who have bought into the Facebook cycle of feeding you the same information over and over again. So I think with the with the next generation becoming so impressionable with that kind of, you're no longer having the conversations around the kitchen table with the families, giving the different generations and hearing all of those different stories about what they all think. You're sort of being fed information, through these Facebook and Instagram.
Well, and we don't all watch the nightly news anymore. Like when I was a kid, we'd watch the nightly news, and if there was a big thing, we'd all have seen it, and we'd roughly have a shared information. But we're all watching 100 different sources of news, and a lot of people just aren't catching certain things that are going on. And it's I don't know. There's probably positivity to it as well, but there's also some risks around information.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because that's been an awesome conversation, and I think we're probably blowing people's minds a bit with all of that. But I'm going to leave a link to this full report in the podcast notes that everyone can download it, get those downloads up. What's the number we're aiming for to beat the last one? A few billion?
Sure. I'll have to check and get back to you. But this one's looking like it is going to smash prior records. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. As it should. I think it's great the more people that can learn about this stuff and understand what we're facing in terms of challenges, but also how we can spin it into opportunities, because that's what we're here for. We're all about trying to pave the way for the future that we want. And there's certain trends out there and they're only getting more complex, but the more we can understand them and kind of try and navigate our way through, the better we'll be, I think. And at least that's the thing that I take to bed at night, and that's how I can sleep well.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today, Steph. It's been awesome again. And thank you for tuning into the Hustle and Bustle podcast this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and a review so that others find out about the show. You can follow the show on Instagram and LinkedIn too. That's all from the episode. Thanks again for listening. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.